I fear that I am the only sceptical voice on this distinguished panel this evening, so I thought it would be nice for me to maybe open with some broad remarks about some of the criticisms of genetically modified crop technology and some of the concerns that have been raised by different groups in society over the last 12 years or so in particular, which has led to this deep controversy which has occurred particularly in this country, across Europe and in some other parts of the world. When this first came onto the public radar screen in a big way, I was the campaigns director of Friends of the Earth, and we became aware during the late 1990s of moves being made by some of the world's largest agrochemical companies for a large-scale introduction of genetically modified crops across the world. It had been coming for some time, but they were gearing up for a major introduction across most of the world's crop-growing regions, and we felt this was something that deserved scrutiny, because as environmentalists and ecologists, we'd look back over the previous 50 years and seen what industrial agriculture had done to the environment, what it had done to soils, what it had done to biodiversity, and witnessed at the same time as this incredible achievement in raising yields, there was still deep poverty and deep hunger in the world. And we wondered what this new escalation of technology in agriculture would mean for sustainable development. Would it help us to solve global environmental problems? Would it help us to end poverty and to fight hunger? So we opened the debate by looking at some of the claims being made by the companies and reached a range of conclusions that I just share very briefly with you right now in terms of some of the broad headings, and then I'll just finish off with a few remarks about what I think should be our priorities in terms of harnessing agriculture for sustainable development in the 21st century. So the first thing that we witnessed was the way in which certain traits were being developed for crops to withstand very potent herbicides, so-called herbicide-tolerant crops. And in the British countryside, we'd witnessed the disappearance of many species, or the decline at least, as a result of reduced biodiversity in the farmed environment. Principally the loss of weed plants that provided both the flowers for insects to feed on, the plants for insects to feed on, and of course, therefore, the food chain that then enabled insectivorous birds to thrive in the countryside. We thought this was quite a considerable threat in terms of using a GM trait that would render these plants, the crop plants, essentially immune to the effects of the pesticides, thereby leading to a loss of the bottom of the food chain, further leading, we argued, to the depletion of natural biodiversity in the countryside. We weren't the only people to say this. The British government's advisor at the time, Natural England, said the same thing and asked for a moratorium before further policy decisions were made. And obviously that moratorium has held until now effectively in terms of commercialisation of crop plants here, although that was a long time ago and things have moved on. There were also concerns, and I, over time, became less worried about this in terms of major public health issues. There were concerns being raised about the impact of these crops on the consumer. What would it mean to eat plants that have been modified in ways that might lead to unforeseen impacts on the human gut, allergic reactions, and so on? Well, I think that particular issue was overstated by the media. I think people did go too far with that. However, we did see one of the dangers inherent in this particular technology from that point of view in the United States. In 2000, my colleagues at Friends of the Earth USA commissioned some testing of plants being grown in the Midwest. There was a plant on the market called Starlink at the time. It was a genetically modified maize plant that was being grown for fodder maize, i.e. for cattle to eat in the feedlots they have there for intensive dairy and beef rearing. This plant wasn't licensed for human consumption because in tests it had been shown to create some sense that there might be an allergic reaction in some consumers. Trouble was, once they started growing this stuff in the countryside, the pollen went from the Starlink, i.e. the fodder maize, and pollinated maize for human consumption. Friends of the Earth US got some lab testing done and discovered that this trait was in taco shells, in various maize products in the marketplace, and there was a massive withdrawal. It cost the food industry a couple of $1 billion to withdraw all of these things from the market. But what it did show, irrespective of the health effects of that particular trait, is that you can't contain this technology. Once it's out in the farmed landscape, if it's grown anywhere near a plant of the same species, especially wind-pollinated plants like maize, you can't control it. And that led, of course, to a whole other range of discussions about the choice of consumers. In this country, some of us like to eat organic food. Others of us, for ethical reasons, might like to avoid GM crops because we don't feel it's the right way to go. And that choice, effectively, by this stuff being blown around in the countryside, is denied. That's obviously an issue for politics. What's this? Is this the Monsanto alarm? Have I gone too far already?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there we are.
This is me trying to time you. I'll just shut up.
I've hardly started, actually. I think it was 10 minutes late.